It is finally here. Super Bowl 55 is just around the corner. We're recording this on Thursday morning. We are just a couple of days away from the big game on Sunday between the Chiefs and the Buccaneers. We are here to break things down from a single game DFS perspective over on FanDuel and let you know who we are targeting for Sunday's game. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gdula. He is the managing editor for numberFire.com. Brandon, Super Bowl 55 coming up on Sunday. How are you doing today?
Good. This is going to be a good one, one way or the other, I think. We get the quarterback matchup of Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady. And that's really, I think that's it. Like, there won't really be anybody else on the field or anything. I think it's
I assumed it was like a sumo wrestling competition where it's just those two going head-to-head, trying to shove each other outside the ring. That was my assumption.
I think that's
feel free to correct me if that's not correct, though.
I think that's just part one of the skills challenge that they're going to have. I think they're going to bring back that the Pro Bowl skills challenge where they're like running over the bags, trying to throw some darts, probably wearing sunglasses too, maybe some shorts. I don't know. I think that's probably all it comes down to. But
I do remember like staying up like super late and watching like replays of the skills competition back in the day. They'd throw them on like ESPN or whatever at like 2:00 in the morning, and I'd be like in the basement, just like, oh yeah, like this is what I want to do with my Friday or Saturday night. And you wake up for the Super Bowl the next day, just a good time. So I hope they bring those back. That would be fantastic. But weirdly enough, there actually is a real football game coming up on Sunday. I'm being told in my ear by Cal that it's an actual football game. So I guess we should talk about that potentially, but it's not just the Super Bowl. It's also single game DFS. And there are a lot of different dynamics to consider for single game DFS. We'll go through some strategies, our thoughts on the MVP spot and everything else. And we'll be talking specifically about FanDuel because the single game slate on FanDuel is very different from other sites. So if you're looking for other stuff, you can just listen to the player analysis. But our emphasis for roster construction and stuff will focus on the FanDuel side of things. Before we dive into breaking down Super Bowl 55 from a DFS perspective, though, a couple of quick announcements here from a scheduling perspective. First, there is a listener league for the Super Bowl single game DFS. Same link as always, FanDuel.com/league/listener league. We'll also have a link to that in the podcast post up on numberFire.com. Again, FanDuel.com/league/listener league, $5 entry, 3 entries max, and there is no rake, which means FanDuel makes nothing off of this contest. All the entry fees go right back to you, the listeners. Couple of shows coming up later this week, too, to talk about prop betting. We have Brandon, me, and JJ Zachariason on Friday. That is at 4 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope pages. Usually 3:30, pushing it back to 4 for just this week for the final one. We have our betting competition there as well. So 4 p.m. Friday for the live stream with Brandon, me, and JJ. Also today, Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have our first ever live edition of Covering the Spread. That is with myself, Dr. Ed Feng, JJ, of course, and then also Erin Kate Dolan of Sports Grid and FanDuel. She'll be breaking down her favorite prop bets. Same with JJ and Ed as well. 6 p.m. Eastern, live on YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope. We'll also have that in the Covering the Spread podcast feed after the fact as well. So lots of fun this week. Live streams 6 p.m. Thursday, 4 p.m. Friday to get you set for Super Bowl 55. The biggest Sunday of the year is quickly approaching, and FanDuel is making sure you have a chance to celebrate with one of the biggest NFL daily fantasy contests of the year. The NFL Big Game Bowl is live on FanDuel, and for just $4.44, you have a chance to compete for a share of the $3.55 million prize pool, including a whopping $1 million first place prize. With Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, and all their offensive weapons set to take the field this weekend, there is no shortage of big names to build your team around. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's take a look here at Super Bowl 55 from a DFS perspective, starting off with where things start, and that's what the betting odds say for this game. Right now, the Chiefs are 3-point favorites, -120, the juice on the -30. That's heavily shaded towards the Chiefs. The total down to 55.5. It was previously 56.5. I think it opened at 57.5, actually, so it's been coming down pretty steadily, which is very interesting. As of right now, over at FanDuel Sportsbook, 80% of the money on the side here is on the Chiefs -3, 68% of the tickets, so skewing money towards the Chiefs. There is not a lot of money on the Bucs money lines. It's weird here because there's a bit of a split. 53% of the tickets and 46% of the money are on the Bucs money line. And then as far as the total goes, after it moved down to 55.5, we've seen 73% of the bets and 75% of the money on the over. So that is after the move down to 55.5, which came on Wednesday afternoon. As far as injuries go, the Chiefs pretty close to full health. Le'Veon Bell, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Sammy Watkins were all limited in practice on Wednesday. Seems like they're trending towards playing, though Watkins and Bell may not be 100%. They did not practice last Friday. So they had injury reports last week and this week. Bell and Watkins limited Wednesday, Thursday, out Friday. Did practice again this Wednesday, though, so probably not 100% healthy. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, though, does seem a bit more healthy. As far as the Bucs go, Antonio Brown was able to practice on Wednesday in a limited fashion. He was listed as doubtful last week, like they listed an injury designation, but he didn't practice then. He did practice Wednesday. So if I had to guess, I would lean towards saying he still has good odds to sit and may not be 100% if he plays. So worth noting that as far as Antonio Brown goes, potentially not at full health. So a couple of injury situations to consider. We'll get more answers as the week goes along, but did want to get our thoughts here. We'll talk about contingencies based on the health of Watkins, of Antonio Brown as well. Let you know how we're thinking based on the way things break with inactives on Sunday. So Brandon, a big part of single game DFS is deciding how you think the game will play out. Because if you think the Chiefs win by 14, a different group of players will be good selections than if you think the Bucs win by 14 points. So how are you seeing this game play out? What are your initial thoughts on the overall view of this game?
Well, I see the Bucs getting the ball first. I dug into coin toss stats and deferrals, and I found that the Buccaneers deferred every time they won the toss for their first 6 until weeks 16 and 17, and then they won the toss and took the ball. And the Chiefs have deferred every time they've won, all 8 times this year. And teams that played the Chiefs deferred or received the ball 3 out of 10 times, which is kind of quite high at 70%, just a 70% deferral rate. Interestingly, the Buccaneers did take the ball, or they deferred, when they played the Chiefs. But a lot is pointing to the Buccaneers getting the ball first, and that doesn't matter a ton, but I think it kind of matters from a game flow standpoint, just because when they first played, this game got out of hand pretty quickly, and it's very possible the Buccaneers come out with a good game plan and move the ball down the field with that first possession. Of course, that might not happen, but I think it's going to happen. And what I really expect to unfold from there is that both teams just air it out a ton. We were talking about this before the show, but the first half pass rates in that first game, just super high. I look at when a team's pre-snap win probability was between 20 and 80%. In the first half in that game, the Chiefs threw 84% of the time. The Bucs were about 70%. And then we've seen them both throw a lot early in the playoffs. Their first half pass rates are 65% for the Bucs, 69% for the Chiefs. And, of course, we could see a huge deviation from the expectation because the Chiefs do have the worst adjusted rush defense in football. The Buccaneers are just okay running the ball, but really Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones have been pretty efficient, all things considered, especially compared to Keyshawn Vaughn and LaShawn McCoy on their limited touches. I think what's better there is that Tom Brady ranks top 8 in play action efficiency this year. The Chiefs were just average against it. So I think it's less about establishing the run and using a lot of play action. I think that's the way that the Bucs can keep this thing close until ultimately the Chiefs probably pull away. So I think it does stay close for a bit. And then the Chiefs just sort of be the Chiefs in the second half. I
think my assumed game flow is also a close game. If I look at my numbers for this game as far as expected spreads, it's pretty close. And I think that that's valuable to have. Also, they skew towards the under, which is interesting. And I think it is interesting, especially with the total coming down, which would lead me to think that if I'm making an assumption, I think a lower scoring game is very much within the range of outcomes. And that does alter the way that you roster players, because some positions are more touchdown dependent than others. Like quarterback is very touchdown dependent. I'm not saying that means I'm going to be underweight on Mahomes and Brady, but like if I have one lineup, it's possible I have just one of them in that one lineup. I think that is kind of my takeaway from a potential lower scoring game is if I have a single entry lineup and I'm just doing one, I don't know if I necessarily need to force both quarterbacks into that. I can do so because the salaries allow me to do so for this slate. It's not that hard to get both quarterbacks, but if I have just one lineup, I think that it's at least a consideration for me to only have one of the quarterbacks in that lineup.
Yeah, I think that's a big. I've done the numbers on this, and 2 quarterback lineups, optimal lineups in 2019, it was about 30%. So it's not that frequent where both quarterbacks put up enough points and there's enough value elsewhere. This game is a little bit trickier because there are a few options who can put up a big play. Like a Mecole Hardman can have a 40-yard touchdown, and that could be enough. But I would typically still stick with a one quarterback lineup unless I think it's a full-on shootout and everything is dispersed, primarily from the Bucs, because we know the Chiefs have a very concentrated target tree. So, I mean, we're going to go through this. We're going to go through what we think is most likely, what we think is most contrarian. We just got to understand, everything's pretty much in play. And that's what makes it hard to break this down, because we want to give out what we think is most likely, but what's most likely
is probably what everyone else thinks is likely.
Yes. And so, I don't want to talk like my main lineup is going to leave $1,500 in salary on the table. But if you do that, probably going to have a very unique lineup, all things considered. So we're going to have to balance that. But a 2 quarterback lineup is more justifiable than the numbers probably say. But I still think I might try to avoid that to be a little bit different.
I think the main reason that dynamic is different is because, like a lot of times in a single game lineup, you're going to have a featured running back. And we might see that. That's within the range of outcomes for Fournette, for Darrell Williams, potentially for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But it's not locked in. There's no Dalvin Cook, no Alvin Kamara. There's no guys like that for this game. So I think that does increase the value of the quarterback. So if we were to simulate this slate out, I'd assume a 2 quarterback lineup would be in the optimal more than 30% of the time. I'd probably put it 45. I don't know if that's jumping it up too far, but that means 55% is just one. So that's where I'm at. So I think the overall takeaway here is we both see a projected close game, which will influence a lot of what we're talking about here. Let's talk about the MVPs. And I think that's kind of the second discussion point here, because if you're filling out a lineup, I think that this is not a hot take. This is not a new thought process, but you probably should start at your MVP, because on FanDuel, you're just picking the highest scoring player for the game, because the salary is the same. You get a 1.5x multiplier. Nothing else matters. So what you do is you plug in your MVP based on your assumed game script for that specific lineup and ask yourself, who else would do well if I assume the MVP does well? That's why everything starts with the MVP. So let's start things off here with the MVP discussion. I think that it's very tough to justify going with more than 4 potential players at MVP. I think that Mahomes and Brady are obviously very good. I think that Hill and Kelsey are the other 2 guys I'd consider. The Buccaneers guys, hypothetically, you could go Fournette. You could make a case for me. You could make a case for Evans. You could make a case for Godwin. However, I think that their range of outcomes, their ceiling is much lower relative to the others. So I think that for me, I'm likely to keep things pretty tight and go with just one of those 4 players. Now, within those 4, probably going to be quarterback about 2/3 of the time. If you look at the Chiefs this year, we saw Mahomes be their highest scoring player in 11 out of 17 relevant games. Tom Brady was the highest scorer in 13 of 19 for the Buccaneers. So that's about 6-7% when you break it down between the 2 teams combined. When it wasn't Mahomes, it was either Hill or Kelsey. They both had 3 games, the team's highest scorer. On the Buccaneers side, things were more spread out. We saw Mike Evans do it twice. Leonard Fournette did it once. Ronald Jones once. Chris Godwin once. Antonio Brown once. It's spread out, and those spread out market shares make it tougher for someone like Evans to be the MVP. The other reason that I'm pretty bearish on the non-Brady Bucks for MVP stuff is because Evans is the guy I would want to use there. He is the guy who gets the downfield targets. He gets the red zone targets, but he also has a really tough matchup because the Chiefs are really good at limiting outside wide receivers. And Evans did score twice in their first matchup this year, got good amount of volume, but I think it's a tough spot for him. We saw the Chiefs hold Stephon Diggs and John Brown under 100 or to just over 100 yards combined. I think it's a tough matchup for him. Godwin doesn't get as much downfield love as Evans does, so it's hard for me to get to him. So to me, Brandon, I would say it's going to wind up being Mahomes, Brady, Hill, or Kelsey. And I think I'll probably be on the quarterbacks about 2/3 of the time, meaning I'll be on Hill and Kelsey the other third. What about you? Where am I wrong in that discussion?
You're not wrong. Again, it comes down to if I were telling anyone what is most likely to happen, what's the safest way to play it, it would be exactly what you said.
I think the safest way to play is just go quarterback. I think that if you're being a bit different, it's the Kelsey or Hill angle.
A bit different, yes. Very different is just taking the shot with Mike Evans and seeing if he can get a multi-touchdown game. If they trail, we've seen in 22. There were 22 slates in 2019 with a total over 50 points. 8 of those 22 MVPs in the optimal were either a tight end, which was Travis Kelce, or a wide receiver. So 8 of those pass catchers, 5 running backs, and 9 quarterbacks. So it's a bit of a tighter split there. And I think it's important that we kind of foreground just general like expectations with quarterback, because yes, going into this game specifically with how it breaks, Patrick Mahomes is going to be very, very popular at MVP. Tom Brady is kind of the easiest way to pivot. Over 2019's entire slates on FanDuel, about half of all lineups in single game contests rostered a quarterback at MVP. Quarterbacks were the MVP about 35% of the time. So there's some natural leverage there. However, this is a bit different. I would expect Mahomes to be at least 60% in the MVP slot or close to it. He's about 40% likely to lead the slate in FanDuel points based on my simulations, which feels a little low, but it just uses historical expectation here. So I think there's a lot of leverage in going away from Mahomes, but in the same breath, he's the most likely, he is the best MVP play. From a process standpoint, it's just how far you want to get down the rabbit hole of the game theory and pivoting away from that. So I think that you're absolutely right where it's the 2 quarterbacks, Kelsey and Hill, who make the most sense at MVP. I would say the easiest way to get some leverage here is going to Hill or Kelsey at MVP without getting. That's not going to get you too crazy. You're going to get about 25% of Patrick Mahomes' targets. And we just typically see receivers and tight ends undervalued at the MVP slot in favor of those quarterbacks. So I think it's that top 4, but I will be more aggressive, a little more DGaffy at
like
time.
How often are you going to like Mike Evans? Like, do you think it's something you're going to do a lot, or is it just like, oh, I'll get a sprinkle here and there?
Probably like if I'm building 100 lineups, probably like at least 10 of those will be Mike Evans MVP lineups.
Okay. Is it only Mike Evans outside of those 4? Is he the only one you go to, or would you go Godwin or Fournette even?
I would consider Godwin. I would consider Fournette. I would draw the line there. MVPs don't really you don't have to get completely weird with MVP. That's not the right way to play it. But those are the 7 total players I would really consider rostering at MVP, and probably be lowest on Godwin, maybe, just from a ceiling standpoint.
Yeah, because I don't know which script Godwin winds up being the MVP. I think that if I assume the Bucs roll, then Fournette would wind up being there. Yeah, so
and if they trail, it's probably going to be more Evans.
Right, exactly. So I think that's if it's maybe if it's a super high scoring tight game, but then I don't know if in that lineup if I get to Godwin at all, because I think then the value in Brady, Hill, Watkins or Brady, Hill, Kelsey, Mahomes goes up a lot. So, and let's not forget to Godwin there. So I think that's one thing to consider for sure. So for me, I think it will probably wind up being just those four. I think that if I have like a single lineup, the odds that I go Kelsey or Hill at the MVP slot are decently high, just because I know that I'll get leverage there. I would assume that, like, I think that if we're talking realistically, I would bet that I think Kelsey's the best MVP play, I guess I should say. If I have one lineup, I think that Kelsey might be that guy, because people are going to talk about Mahomes, they're going to talk about Brady, because it's, the two quarterbacks, and they're the greatest quarterback of all time, and a guy who's well on his way to being right in the same tracks. And then you have Tyreek Hill, who went just bananas against this very same team back in week 12. So to me, I think that if you're looking for leverage, which you need to be for this slate, it's Travis Kelce. I think that he is the way to do so. He's a little bit more expensive than Tyreek Hill. I think that's beneficial too. So I think there are enough reasons for me to think that Kelce will be the least popular between those four, and therefore might be the best. Again, he was the Chiefs' highest scoring player as many times as Hill was this year, and I think that's worth mentioning too. So that's the way that I'm seeing things. Do you agree with me that Kelce might be better than Hill if you have just like one lineup, or would you still go with Hill there?
So, historically, even with Kelce, and if you want to throw on like Mark Andrews, we don't see tight ends really get into the MVP slot very frequently.
But he's not a tight end. Like, he's not a tight end.
He's also not Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, but
who's more likely to get to 175 yards?
I mean, it's obviously Tyreek Hill, but like, is that the way the game is going to break? Like, I think, again, with the way the game is most likely, like, not most likely to break. Like, if we're talking about true ceiling, you go Tyreek Hill. That's why when we were talking with multiple game slates, I said Tyreek Hill every time for that exact same reason. But here, everyone's probably going to think that way. And they're probably going to put Tyreek Hill at their MVP as a result of that. And so I want the leverage, and I'll go Kelce instead. That's the way that's where I'm coming from. Like, it's well within the range of outcomes for Kelce to be the highest scoring player. He does not have the best ceiling. I think that's an important distinction between the highest scoring player for a one-round simulation versus the highest ceiling.
Sure. I mean, it's pretty much a coin flip between the two.
Yeah.
The fact still remains that, Kelce wasn't in a ton of optimal lineups last year, and that is like it's a thing. His upside is good enough, obviously, to lead this slate in FanDuel points. But if you just stretch that a little further, I still think that makes the Buccaneers pass catchers in play, because in the event, if you play it that way, and Mike Evans leads the slate in FanDuel points, you're getting so much more leverage over even Kelce. So again, we could just go back and forth, same things here. Mahomes is the best MVP play.
Yes, straight up.
You are not going to sneak up on anybody with Patrick Mahomes as your MVP unless you do a lot of weird stuff. Save salary, probably at least 1,000. 500 is not going to differentiate you enough. Or take a stab on, say I'm going to play Patrick Mahomes. I'm not playing Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. I'm going to play Scotty Miller. So, if Antonio Brown's out.
We're still talking MVP here?
I'm talking lineup construction with Mahomes as your MVP.
Okay, cool. I was like, how did we get on Scotty Miller? We were in the MVP section of this, and all of a sudden I hear Scotty Miller's name, and my brain just like snaps into place. Like, what?
If you but had you listened before what I was saying?
I would never listen to you. Come on.
So I'm just saying, if you play Mahomes at MVP, you are very likely going to have the same or similar lineups to other players, unless you do something else at your 4 flex spots.
Yes.
I won't name any other names because I don't want to confuse Jim.
Sure. We're going to talk about those other flex spots here in just 1 second. But first, Big Game Bingo is back on FanDuel. And all you have to do to get in on the action is claim your free card. It is simple. Every bingo card has 24 big game props and a free square in the center. Your card will automatically mark the square for every prop that hits throughout the course of the game. And all you have to do is click Call Bingo when you fill 5 squares in a row to see if you win. The top 25,000 users will be eligible for prizes ranging from free entries, to a $10,000 first place prize. For more details, visit FanDuel.com/bingo or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's move beyond the MVP discussion here and talk about what you do after the MVP. And I think, to me, an interesting strategy for this is excluding Mahomes and going Brady, Hill, Kelsey. Because when you're doing that, it goes back to what you said. You are getting half of the Chiefs' targets in the playoffs. Actually, it's more than that because Kelsey has 35% of the team's targets in the playoffs. Tyreek Hill has 28%. Hill has 67% of the deep targets. Kelsey has 53% in the red zone. Most points that Patrick Mahomes play or gets are going to come via Kelsey and Hill. If you go Brady plus Hill plus Kelsey, you are saving salary. The remaining two spots in your lineup are $8,250. I can totally do that for sure. You are differentiating from the Mahomes lineups because you're taking out every Mahomes lineup from your competition. And what percentage of those non-Mahomes lineups have all three of those guys in there as well? And I think that that's not going to be 100%. So to me, I think that's a very interesting strategy for building a roster that can be unique, but also does not torpedo me if Mahomes does well. So that's where my mind is at when I'm looking beyond just the MVP slot, soaking up that production without necessarily using Mahomes. What are you thinking here? What stands out to you after the MVP slot?
So just like, are we talking lineup construction or are we talking?
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, lineup construction is a total thing. It's going to depend exactly on who you put at MVP. So, like you said, makes a lot of sense to start every lineup with your MVP because everything trickles down from there. I would say what one thing I would consider is I can't consider a 4-1 Buck stack very often.
I can easily. What's wrong with that?
I mean, who's it going to be? Brady at MVP then?
Or Fournette?
I mean, if you play Leonard Fournette at MVP, so like this is the thing. He's going to lead this slate in FanDuel points some of the time.
Yeah.
Or like 2% of the time. If the Bucks come out and just run the ball and rely on Leonard Fournette and Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs struggle a little bit and don't have those huge ceiling games, that's a very appealing way to attack things. So, I mean, in that event, yeah, a 4-1 Bucks lineup is gonna get you some leverage. I don't know if it's gonna pan out. So, I mean, okay, so I'm getting a little all over because I thought we were going to talk about non-MVP priorities next, and now we're talking just general lineup construction. Yeah. Just a note. About 64% of perfect lineups in single game formats were a 3-2 split, so it's a more balanced split, and then 36% or so were 4-1 stacks. So you can do it like the Chiefs onslaught, the 4-1, but again, you're getting leverage off of everything if you assume the Bucks win and go a 4-1 stack, which I don't recommend a ton, but
yeah, why not? You got enough though.
If you want to get weird, that's gonna, and if that hit, like, yes, it's gonna hit 2% of the time. But if Sunday turns out, because and the simulation we're in is that simulation where the Bucks win and just kind of roll, and nobody really expects it, it's going to be great. But my overall line of construction is going to be a little bit more balanced than I might like to. I want to roster both quarterbacks, but just looking at the past data, like if you miss out on those second tier, third tier scorers, and the game puts up enough points, I mean it's a high total. There should be yardage, so I would have to think that you need to have a game flow in mind with every single lineup. So if I think it's going to be close, I think that Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, maybe one of the tight ends from the Bucs are going to be putting up yardage, going to be productive. So the majority of my lineups are going to be a little bit more balanced, and that's why I'm leaning toward assuming I'm going to have one quarterback in both lineups so that I can get to those key playmakers.
Yeah, and if you use just one quarterback, let's say you just use Mahomes, then you do have the ability to live in that mid-range. And the mid-range has a lot of enticing options. You've got Darrell Williams at $9,000, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is $10,000, Mike Evans $11,500, Chris Godwin $12,000, and Leonard Fournette is $12,500. So you would have balance inherently if you just go with one quarterback. The dilemma you get to then is, like, I kind of think from a salary perspective and a roster construction perspective, we almost have to consider Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce to be quarterbacks because the salaries are so high. Kelce, $500 less than Brady, and Hill is $1,000 less. So it's not a huge gap. So I think that's where I get to the issue with balance, and that's where I get to the issue with Godwin, Evans, and Fournette in general, is it forces me to potentially settle for just one of those guys. Like if I go Mahomes and Kelce or Mahomes and Hill, I've got 98-33 left on average per roster slot. I can make that happen, but it like I can get to Evans probably there, but like I'm still forcing myself to roster a value play. And if I'm going to roster a value play, I might as well get the studs that I want. So I think that to me, I think that I'm probably going to wind up being a bit more top heavy with my lineups, even in the lineups where I have just one of the quarterbacks, because I think that Kelce and Hill, because the target shares there are so concentrated, because their upside is so good, I think that I'm still going to wind up having a more top heavy lineup, even when I do go with just one quarterback.
Yeah. So, I mean, this just goes back and, I keep bringing this up, but if I were building the highest floor lineup, I would do my best to get to Brady and just say I'm fine with one of the value plays, and then I can kind of fill it out from there, which is effectively what you're saying. But it's pretty easy to do that. So I'm trying to like go one step further and think it's a little trickier, and it feels less good to overlook one of the quarterbacks and build with, a Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, those guys. So I think by nature, that's going to be a little bit more contrarian. And that's something that I can never really separate, even if we're talking about just a single lineup, because in a single game format, I'm not thinking head to head. You're thinking, how can I approach this slate as uniquely as possible?
Yeah. How can I finish first? That's what you need to ask yourself effectively. I think that you can do that with those options, though. So let's talk about some individual players here, starting with the backfields. And I want to lump these all together because, like, it's the same discussion for both. Do you think what we saw in the conference championships will stick? That means that if we do, Leonard Fournette and Darrell Williams are going to be pretty decent plays. I think that Fournette specifically is going to be someone who would stand out there. And I think that Fournette is the guy who has the best odds to keep the role he had in the conference championship, because in the game or in the week before the conference championship, Ronald Jones practiced in full on Friday. He was taken off the injury report. He was fully healthy, but even with that, they rode Leonard Fournette. The 2 games since Ronald Jones has come back, Fournette has played 69% of the snaps. Very nice. He has 27.5 adjusted opportunities per game, which is carries plus 2x targets, because targets are twice as much as carry. 6.5 targets per game for Fournette in that time. 90.5 yards per game, 32% of the team's red zone touches, and it's worth noting that he got more of the red zone work in the conference championship. So I think the conference championship, to me, gave me a lot of confidence in Leonard Fournette. I don't think Fournette is going to grade out well when you consider the salary, but I think that's an advantage here, because it may not put him in a lot of optimizer lineups. It may push people away from him. Like if you can go Godwin or Evans, people are probably going to go that way. I think that Fournette actually has a decent amount of viability, both in assumed neutral scripts and especially in scripts where I assume the Bucs win. So I think that if I'm looking at these backfield situations, I think that I do want to try to be overweight on Fournette, because I think people will still be skeptical of him, which is fair, but I think that there are a lot more paths to him being enticing than what the roster rates will say after the fact. So what do you think about the backfields here?
Yeah, Fournette would be the place I'd look first, and it's tough because the salary is 12.5. So he's above Chris Godwin at 12,000, above Mike Evans at 11.5. So I think by that, he's going to be hard to get to. However, I think he kind of fits from every game script angle because he ran 65% of the routes last week. We know that the Chiefs are beatable on the ground. We haven't seen the Bucs really just run the ball, even against the Chiefs here, but they very easily could. And with the status of the Chiefs being so uncertain, I don't think a Chiefs running back has been really very worthwhile for the most part, most of the season. So if I had to play one running back, it's going to be Leonard Fournette. And yes, the salary is kind of an issue, but it's also a big benefit because again, people aren't going to be looking to go out of their way to play Leonard Fournette. They're going to be fine settling with Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, or just not getting there if they can't get there because they want to play somebody else. So there's a lot of I think Fournette's going to be the most interesting play of the slate, and he could do nothing. They could just throw the ball 80% of the time. They could get, but there are a lot of paths, like you said, to Leonard Fournette having a really good game against this league worst adjusted rush defense.
Yeah, I think that he is someone on whom a lot of people will be skeptical, and that's advantageous because it means we might be able to get him at a roster rate that is worse than his role would indicate, because at 69% snap rate, all the targets he's getting, that's pretty valuable to have. So I do like Fournette. On the Chiefs side, I actually think it's kind of a similar line of thinking where I might want to go with the higher salary guy. The higher salary guy is the worst play in a vacuum. That's Clyde Edwards-Helaire, because in the conference championship, we saw Darrell Williams get 13 carries. Edwards-Helaire had just 6. So that means that it seemed like they were riding Darrell Williams. Williams had a 24% red zone share. Edwards-Helaire did have a touchdown, but just a 6% red zone share there. So the better play is Darrell Williams. I would guess that means people will be more inclined to use Darrell Williams than to use Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And looking at some projected roster rates, that seems to be the case, where people will want to use Williams over Edwards-Helaire. But it's also important to remember that Edwards-Helaire was questionable going into that game. He was limited in practice the entire week. He was a full practice on Wednesday of this week.
He outsnapped him, right, last week?
He did. He played. I was just going to say that. 49% snap rate for CEH, 46% for Williams. He ran 19 routes in that game per Pro Football Focus. He ran 4 from out wide. So I think that if you're thinking about this from like a game plan perspective, if you're Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, I think that CEH makes a lot of sense because they're more willing to line him up out wide. Darrell Williams ran just 1 route out of the backfield in that conference championship game, 12 total routes, so 7 fewer routes than CEH, and he was only in the slot. He was not out wide, and CEH is out wide for 4 different snaps. So you don't want to run the ball against the Bucs. The Chiefs are very aware of that and very okay with not doing that. And I think that sets up better for CEH. So if I'm going to get CEH at a roster rate discount because he is objectively overpriced, I think that makes him the better play. So I'm interested in CEH, not as into him as I am Fournette. Like if I'm ranking which one I want to have more leverage on relative to the field, it will be Fournette. But I think that CEH is someone I also want to try to be overweight on relative to the field. How are you viewing this backfield?
Same way. When I saw that he outsnapped Williams, that was a great sign. But what was most important was the route numbers. You said 19 to 12. It was about 50% to 30% or so. And I cannot foresee any scenarios where the Chiefs come out with their elite pass rate, with what we saw them do in Week 12 against the same team, and just try to run the ball with Darrell Williams a lot. Darrell Williams could easily still have more carries than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but as far as the targets go, they should belong to Edwards-Helaire. And, as you mentioned already, the average running back target is worth more than is about twice as, impactful in terms of FanDuel points as the average running back carry. And that's generally out of the backfield because the majority of targets are from the backfield for running backs. But if you get Edwards-Helaire like 2 targets out wide, something like that, I mean, yeah, it sounds kind of strange to say, hey man, if he gets like 1 target as a receiver out on a linebacker or something like that, like he could be in business, but it's a single game slate.
Also, like it's the Chiefs, and the Chiefs know how to use those matchups. Like I think back to like Kareem Hunt when he was there. I think it was against the Patriots. He ran like this really sick route. Like they run really cool stuff with their running backs, and I think they're more inclined to do that with CEH than with Williams.
Yeah, so I'm with you. Fournette's my preference overall. Edwards-Helaire is my second preference, just because I don't envision a lot of ground and pound. And if it is going to be from one team, it's going to be from the Bucs, and it's probably going to be just with Fournette with how they've been doing things. So
yeah,
I think there's a lot of leverage in the running backs because they don't profile it as bell cow feature backs, anything like that, but they have a path to production. They can churn out yardage at a pretty easy clip, and touchdowns obviously can come on the ground or through the air in the red zone. So there's a lot of benefit. That's why running backs are very good. MVP plays overall. This is different, as you mentioned. Right. These are not your Alvin Kamara's, Dalvin Cook's. It's different. But I still, like I said, would consider to some degree Leonard Fournette in some MVP lineups.
The one concern I did have about CEH and Darrell Williams initially, before I looked into it, was the fact that the Chiefs do not have either starting tackle for this game. That could lead you to think, okay, Darrell Williams is generally their 2-minute drive back. Maybe they do that because they prefer him as a pass blocker. That's not the case. In the conference championship, CEH was kept in as a blocker for 7 snaps per Pro Football Focus, and Williams did so just twice. They're comfortable with CEH as a pass blocker. So I think that if they decide to go with a pass-heavy approach, which they probably will because they're the Chiefs, I would think that does benefit CEH. So in both scenarios, we're on the higher salaried guy, and hopefully the guy who winds up being, Fournette will be less popular, but for CEH, probably the guy who winds up being less popular between the two. Let's talk about some value plays. Try to find some guys who help us get to Mahomes, Brady, Kelsey, Hill. Obviously, like you said, you're trying to be more balanced, which I think there's a lot of value in that for sure. But at some point, you will need to have some salary savers.
Oh, yeah.
Who are guys you're considering in that scenario?
Mecole Hardman. I think he's going to be a very popular go-to value. We've seen his role shift a lot. I've been very skeptical on Hardman, much more than the vocal segment on Twitter who seems to love Mecole Hardman. But, it's different now. His role's a lot better. 62% of the routes in the playoffs, 52% of the snaps overall. We know he can get downfield work, and that's enough. And depending on the status of, and almost probably regardless of whether Sammy Watkins plays, I would say Byron Pringle. We saw him just out on the field a ton last game. I think maybe if Watkins plays, he's not going to be 100%. I could see Sammy Watkins maybe in the first quarter out there not doing a whole lot, and is just not effective enough, and he doesn't play a ton. That would not surprise me. I don't think I would actually get to Sammy Watkins at all.
Yeah.
You can talk to me about that, but I think the go-to value plays here that come to mind are Mecole Hardman and possibly Byron Pringle.
I think the Hardman logic is sound because when you look back, so Sammy Watkins returned in Week 12, which was the Bucs game. You look at that game through Week 16 when Watkins got hurt the second time, he actually had the same number of targets as Mecole Hardman. They were both at 13%, but Hardman had 22% of the deep targets, whereas Watkins had just 8%. And like you said, Hardman's had a pretty good role during the playoffs. The snap rate in the conference championship was not ideal, but remember the way that game played out. They were not throwing, and that's why the routes data that you were talking about is more important there than the snap rate data. So I would say Hardman does make a lot of sense. Looking at right now at projected roster rates, he doesn't project to be all that popular. And I think that's advantageous because I see the same thing on Twitter as you, where people love Mecole Hardman there, but that does not translate to heavy usage when it comes to daily fantasy in general. So I think the Hardman is worthwhile, probably my favorite guy on the Chiefs down here. I think that Pringle is in play. Like you said, 80% snap rate, 80% route rate in the conference championship. 5 targets there. He had 3 targets in the divisional round 2. And if you look at the team's playoff target shares, Pringle is third on the team at 11%. 11% sucks. That's not a good number if you're playing a multi-game slate, but it's not a multi-game slate. He is $6,000. And if you plug in Byron Pringle, you're partying, baby. You can go Mahomes, Brady, Kelsey, and you can make that work with relative ease. So I do think I will have a pretty decent number of Byron Pringle lineups, regardless of whether
4-1.
Watkins plays. Yeah, 4-1. I think that works out really well.
I don't know who you'd bring that one back with. We don't have to say.
Oh, I was going to use Brady. Sorry. Brady was going to be in there.
Wait. Did you say Mahomes, Kelsey, Hill, Pringle?
No, Mahomes, Brady, Kelsey/Hill.
Gotcha.
They're one person to me, Kelsey/Hill. They're one in the same. He'd also work well with the Brady, Kelsey, Hill lineup. Not that we're giving up whole things, but
yeah, I'm going to be duplicating a lot of lineups and just swapping in Kelsey and Hill. I can already feel that.
I totally think that is viable. So Byron Pringle and Mecole Hardman on the Chiefs side. However, I think that my favorite value play of the entire slate is actually Cameron Breit? Question mark? If you look at the team's playoff shares in the first two games. So this is when we had Antonio Brown healthy. So kind of assuming that Brown is back this week, which, again, I think there's a decent chance he's not. But in those first two games, even with Brown being healthy, Cameron Breit had 16% of the team's overall targets, 15% deep, and 9% in the red zone. Those are really good target shares. He has run fewer routes than Rob Gronkowski. Gronkowski's run 60 in the playoffs. Breit has run 50 per Pro Football Focus. So if you go based on routes, Breit will not be a good option. But in the conference championship with no Antonio Brown, Breit had 5 targets there. That was fourth in the team behind Fournette, Godwin, Evans. And in the game against the Chiefs back in week number 12, they did lean on their tight ends quite a bit. Gronkowski had 7 targets there. Breit had 6. So I think people are getting kind of hip to the fact that Cameron Breit's role is better than perception. So I'm not saying he will be under the radar, but I do think that straight up, he might be my favorite value play on the slate. Good touchdown odds. He actually has yardage upside, which was always the running joke with me is I didn't think he'd ever sniff 50 yards, but he actually has been doing that. So I actually like Cameron Breit quite a bit. He is my favorite value play, I think, between either team. What's your read on Cameron Breit and just the Bucs value guys in general?
Yeah, pretty similar. I think Breit's very interesting at that 7,000 salary. As you mentioned, he had 80 yards, 50 yards, and then a touchdown. So he's been performing in the playoffs. And, there's a very real scenario where Tom Brady just throws the ball like 50 times in this game, especially if they fall behind. But again, what we've seen from the Bucs is that they've been throwing the ball a lot, and they could come out and deviate from that and try to take advantage of the Chiefs' run defense. But if they stick to any semblance of what they have been doing, there's going to be passing volume to go around, and to go around pretty literally, because they do spread the ball around way more than the Chiefs do. But that puts Cameron Breit very much in play. And I would also say if Antonio Brown's not healthy, Scotty Miller would be someone I would look to, just because they have to have somebody out there. And if I can get Scotty Miller out there on the field with, even in comeback mode, when the defense is focusing on Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Scotty Miller could, he'd be in play for, a downfield target or two.
Yeah, I was down on Miller heading into the conference championships because we saw Tyler Johnson actually get a decent role in the divisional round, but then in the conference championship, Scotty Miller did have a good role. He had the touchdown, but also ran 20 total routes. He was fine. So I think that Miller, if Antonio Brown cannot go, is someone I would use. Now, even if so in the 2 games that Brown played, Miller had just 3 targets, but I think you could at least make a case for Miller even if Brown does go, because I don't think Brown's going to be fully healthy no matter the way things break. So you could go Miller there, but I think in that situation, I'd probably go Gronkowski over Miller just because Gronk's role is more steady and independent of Antonio Brown. But overall, I'm not super in on Gronk. I've already bet the under on his yardage prop, which has gone up, which is not a great feeling. Not fun to check the yardage props and see that they're up higher than they were before, but I'm not super high on him right now.
Yeah, I mean, Brown, just going back to Antonio Brown and how much he'll play, he kind of doesn't play a ton anyway. He's more situational, so he's going to have even possibly fewer opportunities at less efficiency, you would have to think. So I don't know if I'm going to get to any Antonio Brown.
I will not. Antonio Brown, in the 2 games he played during the playoffs, now he did miss quite a bit of the Saints game, so takes it with a grain of salt. But like in those 2 games, he and Gronk had the same number of overall targets, same number of deep targets, and Gronk had 4 times as many red zone targets. So, like straight up, I prefer Gronk over Antonio Brown, and Gronk is a pretty decent discount from Antonio Brown. Actually, I don't. Yeah, Brown's $9,500. Like I didn't know his salary exactly.
I had to look. I was like, I was scrolling up from Breit and Miller, and I was like, I mean, he can't be below this. Yeah. He was up there pretty high.
Any kickers?
I was just gonna ask you. Yeah, I mean maybe. Probably not Ryan Suckup, unless again I'm playing that angle of like a 4-1 Buccaneers. Just maybe there's like a special teams touchdown, and the Buccaneers can just like control the clock because they're just running the ball. And that event, it's going to be probably Leonard Fournette at MVP. But I mean, they rate out okay in terms of finishing as a flex play. But please don't put a kicker in the MVP slot. Like don't do that. So it's more situational. They're going to be like 15% likely to finish like as a flex play.
Yeah, I think in the 4-1 lineups, they definitely work. But like if it's a 3-2 lineup, I'm not sure the kickers work there. But if I assume the Chiefs roll, sure, Butker works there. If I assume the Buccaneers roll, I guess like I could go with Suckup there. But I think it's really just the 4-1 lineups where I assume things get really out of hand. We talked about contrarian plays. I think if I were making a list of players, and this is not contrarian, but players on whom I want to be overweight relative to the field, my list there would be Leonard Fournette, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Byron Pringle, Cameron Breit. What would be your list of players on whom you want to be overweight?
Probably Mike Evans.
List, Evans? Okay.
Mike Evans. Just because we know Mike Evans has that ability. It's not the most likely in this matchup in this game, but he can put up 150 yards and 2 touchdowns against anybody whenever things go his way. Leonard Fournette would be probably the big one. And then I think I'm with you where, yeah, Travis Kelce's going to be popular, but probably not as popular as he should be in the MVP slot. So yeah, I would say Kelce as MVP, I'd be overweight on.
I think that's correct for me too. I'd want to be overweight on Kelce as the MVP. Okay, any final thoughts for you on Super Bowl 55 before we close up shop for today and this year of the NFL version of the Heat Check?
I mean, I think we covered it. I'm sure it was look. It's always hard to break down a single game slate, but I would say it's just most important. Like make an assumption. Yeah. Say, hey, I know the Chiefs are going to win. They're going to blow the doors off the Buccaneers, so there's not going to be a lot of production from any of these receivers or the running backs or whatever, and you go just feel confident because in a one-game sample, anything can happen, but anything can happen doesn't mean you play like
Scotty Miller is your MVP.
Yeah, I was looking for a name that I didn't want to be completely insulting, but
no, yeah. Scotty Miller's fine, just not an MVP. I think the other thing, too, is be sure you're okay being wrong. You're going to be wrong a lot. And if you have bad lineups, that probably means that you had good process because you should have lineups that are very different from each other. Like usually you want to have a tight core. You want to have, all the little doohicker thingers moving together along the screen showing you a tight core. Here, you want to have your lineup spread out because it means that you covered a lot of possibilities. So I physically write out the assumed game script for the lineup that I'm doing because when I'm doing lineups by hand, I will physically write out this is how I think the game is going and do it that way. But it's important to do that in general. Plenty more thoughts on Super Bowl 55 coming up here throughout this week. We have, again, our live stream for covering the spread later today, Thursday, 6 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Periscope pages. Myself, Dr. Ed Feng, JJ Zachariason, and Aaron K. Dolan will also be live tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern with myself, Brandon, and JJ, breaking down our favorite props for this week and also our betting competition one final time for that, too. Do not forget to get entered in the FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League. $5 entry, 3 entries max. There is no rake. FanDuel.com/league/listener league, and the link is up in the post on numberFire.com. We are done with the NFL version of the Heat Check for this year, but a lot of good stuff. We have the PGA podcast rolls on every Tuesday. NASCAR back next week. 3 different Heat Check fantasy podcasts for NASCAR. So you got three slates next week. It's my heaven. That'll be great. UFC with Austin Swaim as well. We have Tom Vecchio with the Daily Deke and the Daily ISO. We're still busy, so you will not miss Brandon. He'll still be here for the Heat Check. But Brandon, I appreciate you. It was fun this year. Where can people find you on Twitter?
I'm at Gdula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in both today and for the entire season. Good luck to you in the Super Bowl, both your DFS lineups and your bets. And we'll talk to you once again next week for some PGA and some NASCAR. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.